Welcome back into Forward Progress here on the Hammer Betting Network. We are doing a Super Wild Card Weekend preview presented by Betfred Sportsbook. If you haven't checked out Betfred yet, do so for all of your betting needs. Now live in Ohio as well. I know Ohio just went legalized gambling as of January 1st. Be sure to check out Betfred. We're very happy to have them as a partner here on the Hammer Betting Network. Pretty timely start time today, 12 o'clock noon, and that's because we do have some breaking news in the NFL, which we're going to get to over the course of the next 90 minutes. Tua Tagovailoa ruled out this week for the Miami Dolphins. That line came off the board pretty quickly, where it was sitting at 9.5 and has reopened everywhere in the range of 13 or so. Going to hide my ugly mug on screen here just to let everyone know what's coming over the course of the next 90 minutes. So, Adam Chernoff from Right Angle Sports, host of the Simple Handicap, will join me in approximately 8 minutes or so, followed by Eric Eager. For those of you who watch me on the Hammer HQ, myself and Eric do Monday Night Football primetime every single week. He's going to hop in at 12:40 Eastern Time. And then Fabian Sommer, my partner in crime for Sunday Night Football, 1:05 p.m. Eastern Time. So that's the Wild Card Preview show today. Chernoff, Eager, Suma, in that order. We're going to get to every game. We're going to get to all the topics. We're going to get to how to handicap these games in specific, all that and more. If you do enjoy the content that we do, please subscribe to the channel. It's Forward Progress. If you're watching on Twitter and you want to get in on the conversation over the course of the afternoon, hop on over to the YouTube channel, as I do like to take comments over the course of the show. And one of the things I do want to do over the course of the show today is get to any questions that anyone might have for our trio of guests. I'll start by saying that obviously this is the NFL playoffs. Everybody wants to bet them. It's very challenging to find significant value on this week's card, in my opinion. And I'll be interested to hear what our guests have to say about this week's card. But when you have played the course of the entire season, it's, we kind of really know what these teams are and how to value them. So we kind of have to look elsewhere in terms of our handicaps for these games. And most of the time, it's you taking a stance on one team being overrated or underrated by the market. Most of the time, it's taking a stance on, just like an injury situation, something, trying to get out ahead of news, something along those lines. So lots to unpack for this weekend altogether. In terms of early movement that we've seen, so Seattle-San Fran is going to be our opening game on Saturday, 4:35. We have seen that number pretty much come across off of 10 at all sportsbooks. Betfred sitting at 9.5 right now, as are the vast majority of sportsbooks. So a little bit of early Seattle money on that game. That's one of the more significant moves of the week in terms of the number, coming off of 10, which is, I don't want to say a key number, but obviously for those who watch football, there is some value in the number 10. Then we have Saturday night, Chargers and Jags. Chargers, took a little bit of money yesterday, small amount, moving them up to 2 at some sports books, or juiced 1.5, but a little bit of early money on the Chargers. For the Sunday games, as I mentioned, Bills Dolphins is off the board up until about 5 minutes ago, reopened at 13 or 12.5, pretty much across the board at a bunch of different sports books. The Giants and Vikings, that one is held at 3. Some over money earlier in the week to bring it up to 48.5. Bengals and Ravens, this one is interesting because Lamar is out for this game. I don't think it's been widely reported yet. It's being widely reported that it's very unlikely that he plays. So I guess I don't want to say out, but the probability that he plays is extremely small. And we're seeing the Bengals still sitting at 7 in the market, -7, -115 at most outlets right now, including Betfred. And then Monday Night Football, Cowboys and Bucks. All those threes in market are now gone, sitting at 2.5 Cowboys on the road. I love the shots already. Third comment in, Rob, what happened to the hairline? NFL is stressful. I mean, yeah, I mean, sports betting just in general will do that to you. But it is what it is. Life goes on. Luckily, I found a wife long before I started losing my hair. So from that perspective, things are okay. Just want to give some quick early thoughts on a couple things here and some of the topics that I want to talk about with our guests today. So there is this thing in sports, not in sports, it's just like a math thing called the transitive property, right? And a lot of the way that people handicap games in the NFL is just by looking at closing point spreads of previous games. So we had the Vikings and the Giants play 2 weeks ago. And essentially, that game closed as a 4.5, Minnesota Vikings 4.5 at home. So we've gone a few weeks now and we get it to 3. And there's a lot of people say, well, how can that line have closed 4.5 merely a few weeks ago, and now it's all of a sudden 3? And then we get situations like Seattle and San Fran, for example, who played on Thursday Night Football not too long ago. San Fran closes a 3-point favorite on the road at Seattle. Okay, swap the home field advantage, add a little bit of extra home field advantage for the 49ers. And, how could this number be where it is? Everyone has a different take on how they bet on the NFL. And what they do and what their process is. I think there's some fundamental flaws in that type of process, but it can help you in a lot of instances. Look at Baltimore, Cincinnati this week, right? The line is sitting at 7. These teams played last week as well. Now, granted, the Ravens, not exactly playing for anything last week. They rested Mark Andrews. It wasn't a game where they could move up in playoff positioning. Anthony Brown started at quarterback. He was horrible, turned the ball over a bunch. But that game closed 11, and now we're sitting at 7. We don't have confirmation that Tyler Huntley's going to play. So what does that number become if it's Anthony Brown, knowing that it closed 11 a week ago? So a lot of people will look at the board purely like that and try to derive what the number should be based off of previous closing spreads. And a lot of that is just because the NFL market is extremely efficient. The closing line is seen as efficient. So people tend to handicap things in that way. But that's enough of me. We're going to get into our first guest here today. You can download his podcast, listen to it wherever you consume podcasts. It's The Simple Handicap. He is a part of the Right Angle Sports Team, one of the most highly respected betting groups in the entire world. You can check out their stuff at handicapper.net. Adam Chernoff, welcome to Forward Progress on the Hammer Betting Network. How's it going?
Going well. New Tim's brew on the go. I know how much you like Tim's. They're debuting it out here out west, so it's been a good morning.
Yeah, I mean, listen, this is sacrilegious for a Canadian to say that they're not a huge Tim Hortons fan, but it's never been my thing. It feels to me like they just take like soil and put it into the machine and just brew it. That's what it tastes like to me, Adam. Are you doing the iced coffees in the winter, or are you back to regular coffee?
No, I make the switch. I make the switch like midwinter. It was really warm here the other day for some reason. We have this like warm spell going, and I went iced coffee, but it froze at the dog park to the top of the lid, and I was like, that's why you got to wait till March.
You can't do that. I hope it doesn't. I mean, where you are is a lot colder than where I am, but I have some personal wagers on the coldest day of winter. What
did you take?
Let me backtrack here for a second here.
Okay.
There was no handicapping process involved here. I was randomly assigned days of winter. So this is a pure, I'll call it out for what it is, a degenerate type of wager just to root for something. But I am currently holding the coldest day of winter right now, which I can't remember what it was offhand, but it was sometime in late December. And this is for the Toronto area, minus 13 degrees Celsius. So I'm just, there's going to be a colder day, but I'm just every day I'm waking up, I'm checking the temperature, and I'm like, let's just keep it warm, baby.
So what was the low for you that you had in the bank?
That's minus 13.
Minus
is what it's been so far. Lowest.
I don't know if that holds up.
Well, it's different for you. So it was 23rd of December. Amateur Hour Sports is Jacob. He's one of our producers here at the Hammer, and
Okay.
he's part of this bet as well. So 23rd of December was minus 13, and that's what we have right now. We're rooting that home.
Okay, that seems light, but there's hope.
Well, I mean, where you are, it gets to like minus 40. So
Yeah.
yeah.
So Toronto's certainly different, but yeah, it feels like a cold snap is coming.
So I also have we got 3 days. We got December 23rd, December 25th, and January 11th. So today I was rooting for cold. Of all the days, it's cold, but it's not minus 13 cold over here, unfortunately.
Great wager. Love it.
All right. I'm sure people are not tuned in to hear about my wagers on the weather. If you are,
how old are we getting? Talking about weather, it's getting.
You know what? Every now and then, I do. Obviously, I'm not an idiot, and I know that sports books are in the business of making money. But like these random wagers, where like you just want to bet on something, and they'll just assign you with a random bet, I kind of like those. Just like as a pure recreational bet for something to cheer for.
Sure.
I love that. I love that. But anyways, let's get into the NFL playoffs. So before you came on, Adam, I was talking about the transitive property, which I am in Adam's Telegram chat, Simple Handicap. He's got up to almost 9,000 subscribers there now. He's got quite a loyal fan base of people
sure
following.
Has.
But I read your write-ups on every pick that you post in there. And a lot of times you go through a process of, well, this line was this a few weeks ago, or this line was this last week, or the last time these teams played. How can it possibly be this now? There has been maybe too much of an adjustment made in this type of situation. And it brings me to a couple of games that we start off with here. And I'm curious, let's start with just the way you cap the postseason, first and foremost. If there's anything different that goes into the postseason handicapping relative to the way you do regular season. And then on top of that, I do want to get into games like the Giants in Minnesota, which we saw a couple weeks ago, close as a 4.5 point spread, and now it's 3. We saw the 49ers go to Seattle on a Thursday night football game a month ago, close 3-point favorites, and now they're 9.5 at home. So let's start with your process for the playoffs, and then we'll get into the transitive property a little bit more.
Okay, first the Telegram write-ups. I don't know if you were following late, like 2018, 2019, but I used to do like these giant, at least 600-700 word write-ups per bet. And then last year was really when I switched to doing just really short. I did them all in tweet sized. And so the Telegram's kind of in between, but there's a lot that doesn't get mentioned within the Telegram. And the reason that a lot of what you're talking about gets mentioned is because I think it's a really easy way to summarize a game and kind of get to where we are. So that's first. I think there's value in it, especially when the games are quite recent, because it's something. It's the reference point to where we were in a similar matchup. I think the kind of art within it becomes saying like, okay, we saw the Vikings and Giants play on Christmas Eve. It's now January 11th. There's been games between. Like, what has changed in both of these teams to get to where we are now? And does that align with where we're seeing the price at now? And I don't think it's as simple as saying, like, here's what the price was, here's what it is now, and betting that blindly. There's something that caused the movement between then and now to get to where we're at. And I think that's the important part and some of the art that goes into it. In terms of just playoff process, not a lot changes, but I would say the biggest difference is that when we're looking at some of these bigger favorites, there's a lack of tendency to take the foot off the gas like you would see in the regular season. And that's not just necessarily subjective. That's hearing it from guys like Matthew Davidow, who do in-play trading for Deck Prism and basically have changed that entire market. He's sort of insinuated that can be the case, but we see it where you get bigger blowouts in the playoffs. And obviously it's a smaller sample size that will always come up, but that's, I think, something that's very real too, that you kind of have in the back of your mind.
I think that's also counterintuitive to what the average fan might think as well. Because I think the average fan would think, oh, it's playoffs, these are going to be closer games type of situation. I remember a championship Sunday, it was the Deflategate one with Patriots and and Colts. They won like 45-7 or something crazy in that game. And then the other game that day was a blowout as well. And we have seen it time and time again in terms of blowouts in the NFL. It's that's an interesting one because it feels like this season, especially, the gap between, let's even say best to worst, but even like this mid-tier in the NFL is like, there's just all these teams that are so closely rated that I would look at the regular season this year and I'd be like, can I really lay a touchdown with this team? Like, are they capable of winning by margin? And it felt like there were so many teams this year in the NFL that just weren't even capable of winning by double digits.
And like, look at Seahawks Rams this past week, similar situation with that, where it was kind of what everyone was thinking on one side. And that was a Seattle team that they were at that price point like one other time. And it was that first Rams game between the two. Otherwise it was just tight spreads all season or them as dogs. And then it's a second game where, I mean, they weren't even close to getting outside the number for the entire game. So there's been a lot of that for sure.
Yeah. Let's start with the breaking news and then we'll get into a little bit more games. And it's not really breaking anymore. It's about half an hour now, but Tua Tagovailoa is out. He did not clear protocol. He will not play for the Miami Dolphins this weekend. Number comes off the board at books within about 15 seconds or so of that news dropping and reopens in the range of 12.5, 13, depending on the sports book right now. Looks like Skylar Thompson is going to be the starter for the Miami Dolphins this week. You have the possibility of Damar Hamlin being at this game, which is like, I cannot think of a worse situation for a rookie quarterback and not a good rookie quarterback in Skylar Thompson to be going into this week.
Okay, so we want to get into the game or do we want to get into the number and what happened yesterday and today? Because I think there's some interesting parts to that too.
I think give the full story.
So yesterday afternoon, like I wasn't expecting anything whatsoever. And so took the dogs out mid-afternoon and then I got a text and it's like, Tua's in. There was never anything leading up to this week that suggested that he would play. Like the last report that we had about Tua was that he had trouble remembering what him and Mike McDaniel were talking about like late last week, the day after. So that was the first thing. And the second thing that was lingering was the Dolphins have been held to this extreme standard ever since the investigation for how they handled it. And so if there's a team that would be unable to rush any player back from injury, it's absolutely the Dolphins. Like there were 3 independent clearances that he would have had to go through to get into this. And so I don't know who sent it first, if it was Tunes or somebody else that went out and then that brought the number back. And now the thing in media to do is anytime you see some of these numbers moving, it's like, well, we got to jump on this and get ahead of it so we can look good for the network. And so it's like, Tua must be in, he's starting. And so we saw this number come back. And then today the announcement happened and now we're back. I still think it hasn't moved enough yet. I think at less than 14, I think it's still short. But in terms of the situation, last week against the Jets, they didn't trust Skylar Thompson on key 3rd and 4th downs. Like they were running pitch plays off tackle on like 4th and 6 across midfield in a game to save their season. And now you're telling me with Mostert, who's having surgery now, which I don't envision how you can play if you're having surgery on your thumb as a running back. So that's a knock against the Dolphins. You have Tyreek Hill, who towards the end of the game against the Jets couldn't even stand up because his ankle's so messed up. You have offensive line injuries, and you're going to put Skylar Thompson into this environment, like you mentioned, on the road against Buffalo. This has got to be ugly for Miami. I still think it's short.
I tend to agree with you. I went down the exact same path as you yesterday. So I was actually recording an episode of Circles Off yesterday, and I get a message saying Tua's going to practice tomorrow. And I'm like, okay, here we go. And, I'm trying to scramble to get a bet and very quickly moves. And then I'm like, you know what? Maybe we'll wait and see. And you're always trying to confirm with the source of like the quality of the information, right? Like, how sure are you and this and that? And the guy was like, that's what I'm hearing. Okay, didn't happen. Anyways, old news now. We get to this situation and I watched a lot. I watched the full Jets-Miami game on Monday.
It was a treat.
As a postmortem. Because I watched through the lens of Red Zone on Sundays, and I don't get to see every play of every single game. I just get to see like teams in the red zone or pivotal plays that affect the win expectancy of a team. And what I kept watching on red zone whenever they showed Miami and the Jets was the Jets getting pressure on the Dolphins. Skylar Thompson like in the grasp, just chucking throwing the ball.
Prayers. Yeah.
Like
all game.
And all I kept thinking was, if this guy starts next week, there's no hope. Like the only reason that this game is not an absolute blowout in the Jets' favor is because they're starting Joe Flacco and they're missing, pretty much the entire offensive line who they just put on IR this week. I tend to agree with you. I'm actually surprised that on the open here, it didn't get bet up further. But is there a possibility that people are just waiting for confirmation on Skylar Thompson? Because, honestly, I almost think this is short. Teddy Bridgewater can't grip a football right now.
His pinkies, his throwing hand pinky's a problem. That's not what you want as a QB ever.
I don't see a scenario. And this is also the Dolphins have made the announcement now, right? Midweek. Yep. The Bills know they don't have to prep for Tua anymore. That's out of the question. This isn't a situation where it's Tua might play on Sunday and the Bills are caught off guard with who the quarterback would be. I mean, Buffalo to me is not the same team as last year, but I feel like they should handle Miami comfortably in this game.
And the one thing I certainly took away from the Pats game for Buffalo was it reminded me of 2020 49ers, where they just have that different speed up front when they're all healthy and into it. They were flying off the line against the Pats. And if you're putting Thompson in that situation, it's ugly. That is ugly.
So I'll tell you my ideal scenario as a bettor, and then you let me know if I'm off base here or if you're thinking along the same things.
Sure.
My ideal scenario here is actually Teddy Bridgewater gets announced as the starter, and they say that he's going to play the game.
So it comes back a little.
Market moves towards Miami a little bit, and then I just hit Buffalo at that price because honestly, he's going to be nowhere near 100%. I think people largely overrate Teddy Bridgewater as a backup now as well. He was very serviceable for a long time, but he's nowhere close to the level that he once was in the NFL. And that would be that's the dream scenario for me is let's get a little bit more of Miami money in some capacity on some sort of positive, optimistic news. Teron Armstead is in, something like that. And then I'll hit Buffalo.
Yep. I'm not off base at all. I think that would be great too. I still, even at 13, I don't know if that's fully assuming Thompson yet. I think we get that report sooner than later, but if it's Thompson, it has to be a tick higher, I think.
I think it has to be 2 touchdowns. I think it has to be 2 touchdowns if it's Thompson. Okay, switching gears. Let's actually talk about another quarterback situation because it's seeming increasingly likely that Lamar Jackson is out. And this kind of leaked last night. It not necessarily publicly leaked, but it was circulating in the Telegram chats and WhatsApp chats and Signal chats about Lamar's not going to play this week. And that got out, and all the 6.5s disappeared for the Bengals and moved up to 7. But that's kind of just where it stayed, at 7, which, in my opinion, is a little bit surprising. I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So here's kind of where the transitive property that we talked about can help you out a little bit. So this game obviously was played just a couple days ago, closed Cincinnati at 11 against Anthony Brown. And I guess some of the things you can take away, Mark Andrews didn't play. Gus Edwards had the concussion, so he was out of the game. They sat some other key starters as well. So there was a mindset and a mentality that came away from the Ravens that probably devalued them a little bit. I never got the sense that even at the opener, it was a number that assumed Lamar was in. It was kind of a middle situation.
Right.
And so the difference between Anthony Brown and Tyler Huntley is definitely something. I don't know at this point how significant it is. The injuries to Huntley, ankle, shoulder, everything else going on, how serious were those? Because if he, last week, I never got the impression that he was going to play, which is why I sent out Cincinnati so early. but I don't know if that was because he was genuinely hurt. I looked at it as a spot where they were just resting him either way in anticipation of this being the spot where he would need to start and kind of be as healthy as possible. And so I don't think we get to 11 again, but I don't know if what we're looking at right now with like an expensive 7 for Cincinnati is fully right either. I still think this can go up a little bit with Huntley.
So I think that this is still short, regardless. Now, I have some hesitations because the Bengals are dealing with injuries on the O-line. The right side of their offensive line,
That's
they lost
trouble.
La'el Collins, they lost Alex Kappa. And honestly, for a game last week where the Ravens were playing for nothing and the Bengals were playing for something, the Ravens were able to generate a pass rush. Like the Bengals pretty much won the game because
Turnovers.
Anthony Brown gave the game away.
Yep.
If we're calling it out for what it is. They didn't really move the ball up and down the field all that well. So that's what's concerning about laying this type of big number here. But to me, I look at the Tyler Huntley offense for the Ravens since Lamar's got injured. They put up 13 points at home to the Steelers, 17 at home to the Falcons, 3 on the road at Cleveland, 16 on the road at Pittsburgh. Like, they don't score points. And I just struggle to imagine a ceiling for the Ravens that's like higher than 17 points in my head. Now, maybe the ceiling is definitely higher than that, but like that's what it feels like their maximum offensive output is. And then you got Joe Burrow, who, this is not who I am. At some point, you just have to like this is the Tom Brady phenomenon from years ago, right? Where I just kept losing money betting against the Patriots. I'd be like, this is overvalued in market. Joe Burrow is 20-3 against the spread in his last 23 starts. Like, does the market just miss something with Cincinnati, or is it like just a small sample? Like, they cover spreads all the time. This is all this team does.
Okay, well, I saw that trend and stat as well, and what came to mind immediately was last year during that run, it was a different situation. They were underdogs. They were below expectation. They were overachieving because of who they were, how they seeded out, and what they were going through. I think this year's very different, where we're seeing them obviously at a much bigger price tag within the market. Currently is a 7+ point touchdown favorite.
Right.
So I do think that that's different, but I agree with you. Like if you're looking for a path to success here for Baltimore, you really like your best hope is a really lengthy opening drive touchdown. And then you're just basically looking at this as needing a turnover or 2 from Cincinnati. Because if the Ravens find success on the ground, open with the score, and you're looking at like 7-0, 5-6 minutes left in the first quarter, that flips it. If it's any other way and the Ravens are forced to play catch up, I can't see Huntley leading this team without their top 2 wide receivers now to much against this Bengals defense, especially if you get into the second half adjustments and how good Amaruno has been. And let's see what happens there. But it's so narrow here.
Yeah, I kind of feel like exactly what you said is the way I see the game playing out, which I guess could pose a live betting opportunity as well. Like some people typically don't get involved in a live market if the number is worse than what the pregame market is. But I would like to back Cincinnati in a live market if they get out to a lead, because I just don't think that's a situation where Baltimore is suited to come back. I think this is an interesting question here. At what point are you willing to play the Ravens if Lamar is out?
I don't know if we get to 10. If it was 10,
I would play the Ravens with Huntley.
I would look at 10. Yeah, I don't know if we get there though.
I highly doubt it. I would be like, it has to be another Brown game to get to 10.
And I couldn't bet the Ravens with Anthony Brown. That's not happening.
I could not. I couldn't do it. Devin says the Ravens aren't going to turn the ball over 4 times this week. I will say this. This is a misconception in sports, but people often say this is like, oh, they turned it over 3 times this week, 4 times this week. What's the likelihood of that happening again? It's actually way higher likelihood that teams will turn the ball over a lot in multiple weeks. It's like, what I'm saying is that it's rare that teams just fix their turnover problems in the span of a week. It tends to be a longer, tailed thing. Just pointing that out.
That's deep wisdom right there.
Just pointing that out. Now, again, different quarterback possibly this week as well. I do want to talk Giants and Vikings because of, one, the way that the spread has moved in a few weeks, but also because you released a play on the over in the Giants and Vikings game a few weeks back, which, if I recall correctly, I think there was 28 points in the fourth quarter of that game. You might remember better than I do on that Giants-Vikings game from a few weeks back. I'll start by saying, like, this Vikings team, for me, I've probably bet against them 10 times in 12 weeks. So my opinion on them is very different from what the market perceives them at. But it is adjusted quite a bit right now. There are offensive line injuries for the Minnesota Vikings over the course of a couple weeks. Anything that catches your eye here specifically in terms of this being a game that you bet a couple weeks ago? And is it something that's on your radar this week?
So the Christmas Eve bet on the over was one of several overs in a row that I was betting Minnesota in that did quite well. And the logic there was simply that if they're playing from behind, they become extremely efficient on offense. If they have a lead, their defense is trending towards, at the time, for like a 6-week span, one of the worst in the NFL. It was all ugly across the board. And so the way that these totals were being priced and the way that they were playing games was, as long as you're not getting that really tight game into the second half, as soon as there's urgency on either side of the ball, it was just conducive to points. And so I was just blindly betting Vikings overs. I was doing the same thing with Bears overs prior to the Fields injury as well. It was like the two spots with totals that I was right in a year of a few totals where I wasn't even close. I will say that I was surprised to see this get bet up initially at open to where we are now. I didn't think it was going to get bet up because, like you mentioned, the way that first meeting finished was just a lot of crazy stuff late. The 2-point conversion set everything up as well that was needed from the Giants. And so I think the first half was sort of a reflection of what could really go wrong with Vikings totals. Mm-hmm. And then the second half was very much kind of what I was looking at for the better part of 2 months. And so to me, in that first game, it was 47 as well. And it went up and then it came back and it was kind of around the entire week. I wasn't expecting the first move this week to be back to the over. I thought people could potentially look at that, the O-line injuries for the Vikings, how that played out in the first half, just what was needed to get it over, and then add in the playoff game and Daniel Jones in this first spot and all of that combined, and that would lead to under money coming in. So I don't really know what to make of this now at 48.5, but I would assume that it comes back towards where it opened.
What do we make of the Daniel Jones playing his first career playoff game and the long-term trend, albeit small sample, but a long-term trend of quarterbacks playing their first career playoff game being pretty terrible bets against the spread? Is that something that you consider for this week? We have that situation. I mean, Brock Purdy and Geno Smith are playing one another, so it offsets. Justin Herbert, Trevor Lawrence are playing one another, but Daniel Jones, Kirk Cousins has playoff experience. Do you put any stock into that?
I think it's something, and it kind of reflects the situation. What's interesting about this year is, so you mentioned they offset, but I feel like Purdy gets a pass because of Shanahan and his system and what that has done. And I'm going to say if that gets a bit of a pass in how we're talking about it, then shouldn't Daniel Jones and the Giants get a bit of a pass because of how good Daboll and Kafka have been the entire season? And so it seems to me like this season, that's being talked about more than any season in the past. And there's, like, I think legitimate conversations around what could be taken out from some of those as well. And so to me, it's being handled differently than any other season before. I think it's something, but again, in this spot, you have a really good head coach at game planning. You have a really good offensive coordinator. You have a guy that's experienced within the system, and he gets to face a really bad defense here in the Vikings. So there's something to it for sure, but I don't know how much you're applying in these spots specifically.
I saw someone filter that trend even further and then started breaking it down into okay, if it was a good quarterback versus a bad quarterback. And now you're getting into like levels of interpretation, right? Because there's
Yeah.
guys that are like kind of in between. And for me, Daniel Jones is like that in between guy as well. So this trend applies way more to bad quarterbacks making their first career playoff start. Guys like Brady and, I don't remember exactly, what a lot of the Hall of Fame quarterbacks end up doing in their first career playoff start. But if you break it down by people that ended up being really good, it's, we're closer to 50-50 in that type of situation. And the problem for me is like, I don't even really know where I put Daniel Jones on the list because he's a totally different quarterback under Brian Daboll than he was previously.
It makes a difference when you go from Joe Judge to Brian Daboll.
Yes. Those years of Jason Garrett and, oh man. Is Jason Garrett going to be on one of the broadcast crews this week? I wonder with 6 games if he's going to get one of the games.
You'd think he would for sure. Yeah. What a treat that's going to be.
I know that Al Michaels is doing a game with Tony Dungy this week.
That'll be interesting too. It's a fun weekend ahead, I think, in a number of ways.
It's definitely a fun weekend. Have you here for a couple more minutes. Really quickly, I mean, NFL playoffs are tough. We all know that. You have a season's worth of data to make a number. Anything that stands out to you, an actionable piece of info, doesn't have to be a bet, could be something to put in a teaser lay, could be whatever you want to do, but something to just leave with the audience as some sort of actionable piece of info for this week.
Sides and totals, not much yet. What I will point out is Chargers Jags is a interesting matchup in the fact that Staley takes a lot of heat for being a head coach, but at the end of it, he's still a very, very good defensive coordinator. And we have seen him really change week to week in what he puts out in terms of a defensive game plan. And I see a situation where the Chargers don't blitz whatsoever. They play a ton of zone coverage, and that kind of changes up the Jags and their offense overall. And so this team for the last couple of weeks has seen a lot of money in the prop market on Zay Jones, on Christian Kirk. A lot of those guys have been getting a lot of money towards their overs. This week might be a bit of a challenge for the wide receivers if the Chargers do what I think they're going to do defensively, which means it's going to have to be kind of a dink and dunk, short throw, short passing offense for the Jags, which probably brings a guy like Evan Ingram into the fold a lot more than what we've seen in the last couple of weeks and makes him the focal point. And Peterson, too, has been a guy that's really good at attacking opposing defensive strengths and changing up his game plan a lot. And so it's a defensive coordinator and an offensive coordinator, well, head coach, but play caller matchup where you can really trust what they're going to do. And so I think a lot of the prop market might be wrong in the Jags game, and there could be some value with running backs and tight ends specifically for the Jags. So that's waiting to see what comes out overall, but in terms of prices at books, but that's kind of the first thing that really jumped out within this. But there's going to be a lot more prop stuff as QB news gets announced too.
Everyone in this stream, you can find Adam's stuff, his Simple Handicap podcast. Great listen. Check it out anywhere that you find your podcast. And also, he is a member of a great team at Right Angle Sports. You can check out all of their stuff at handicapper.net. Adam, really appreciate you joining me here this week. Best of luck in the Super Wildcard Weekend.
Super Wildcard Weekend. Thanks, Rob. Chat to you soon.
Thanks, Adam. That was Adam Chernoff. We go from one intellect to another in Dr. Eric Eager of Sumer Sports. Eric, how are things going?
Rob, things are well. I'm in Florida right now. I'm praying that my flight is not one of the millions that is canceled today so that I can get back home and see my wife and kids. But, I think that I think that every bet that you can make this weekend is probably more likely than that.
I hope everything works out for you over there. Appreciate you taking. Are you at the airport right now?
No, I'm actually in my room. So
nice. I couldn't tell because of the background, but yeah, it's okay. Yeah. I see. All right, we're all good here. I'll get into a bunch of topics this week. Adam just closed on talking about the Chargers and Brandon Staley, smart defensive mind. This has nothing this is just, I'm scatterbrained sometimes, but I want to pick up on something related to Brandon Staley, because this guy got absolutely roasted this week in the media for playing his starters. And I feel like in the span of 1 year, we have Staley, who's gone from being maybe the most overrated coach in the league last year to maybe now being the most underrated. Like, this is just my opinion. You could feel free to disagree, but the Chargers finished 10-7 this year. They were missing multiple wideouts for a large part of the season. They were missing multiple O-linemen for the multiple points of the season. Their quarterback had a rib injury for half the season. Missing pieces on defense, Derwin James, Joey Bosa. Like, I feel like he got a lot out of that team this year, personally.
Yeah, and I also think that, like, we have a hard time dealing with magnitude when we talk about coaches. So I'm bringing up my numbers right now because I have a wins above replacement basically for coaches when you look at decisions. So not to give up timeouts, not to get delay of game penalties, all of those things, where, you can, a guy can really add to his team. And we make Staley this year for the Chargers the fourth most valuable coach on in-game decision-making. And he's, added to his team this year by a third of a win, which doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of a season, you're looking at, a fraction of a point every game that he's adding. Now, this is again relative to, the rest of the league. And it's certainly down from a season ago where, Staley was number one in the NFL last year, and he added 0.8 of a win by all the decisions he made. Right. And so that's a half win difference, of course, and that's bad, but he's going from first to fourth, right? So we're just looking at the delta there, not necessarily understanding that among the coaches that are still left, he manages the game really well. All the other stuff you're saying in addition is true, like the injuries to Mike Williams, the injuries to Keenan Allen, the injuries to the Boses and those kind of things. Like, I think that, and frankly, playing in a tough division.
Agreed. I'm very curious in this as well. James mentions it in the chat. Out of interest, who are the top three most valuable coaches by those metrics?
The top three. Well, okay. So I'm gonna give. I'm gonna look back at my filter here. It is Nick Sirianni, Sean McDermott, and Dan Campbell.
Okay. And who of the playoff coaches? Maybe this is too much for you to filter out here, but I'm interested to know which of the playoff coaches is the worst. I would think Pete Carroll would be up there, but he has gone for a few fourth downs this year. Maybe he's changing his mind up a little bit. But of these playoff coaches, and maybe it's not necessarily the worst, but who ranks towards the bottom?
Yeah, so if I'm going up here, Mike McDaniel's actually there were 35 coaches who made decisions this year. So if you want to go, it's Mike McDaniel's 31st. Zach Taylor's 28th. I mean, these are things that probably don't surprise you, Rob. Pete Carroll's 26th, Brian Dable's 25th, Kevin O'Connell's 23rd, Todd Bowles is 21st. Doug Peterson is, interestingly, now Doug Peterson's above 0, but he's 19th, which usually he ranks a little bit higher there. Shanahan's actually ahead of him as well at 15. If you go from top to bottom, it's Sirianni, McDermott, Campbell, Staley, Eberflus, Harbaugh, Stefanski, Kingsbury, weirdly, and then Mike McCarthy rounds out the top 10.
That's very interesting because I would have never thought Bowles was as high as 21st. Like, that's what caught my eye because I've seen him punt a lot of fourth downs this year in obvious go-for situations. But I always find that type of stuff really interesting. We will get into Super Wildcard Weekend here really quickly, but you mentioned Kingsbury. Just want to go through a few of the layoffs that have happened this week and get your thoughts on them. So let's start with Cliff Kingsbury. I mean, I feel like it was just his time to go. Like, this experiment has not worked out.
Yeah, it's rough because, you're trying to, after last season, they almost won the division. In fact, if they would have beaten a dead Seahawks team in week 18, they would have won the NFC West. But they go 11-6. It was kind of a Mickey Mouse 11-6, even though, they were covering and winning as road dogs in the first half of the year. It didn't feel real. And then yet at the same time, in the offseason, they for the kids basically gave all three of those high stakeholders the contract extensions, and that just felt like a nightmare. And at least good on them for moving on from the coach and the GM, as opposed to saying, well, we gave them their deals and now we're stuck with them. Like, though you can write those off. And if Kingsbury gets an offensive coordinator job, you get the offset language and all that stuff on his money. So it's not as bad. But yeah, this was bad. I mean, we saw last year and and this is why it's important, by the way, to listen to gamblers and people who are, actually trying to handicap teams, because, when you look and say, oh, well, that team was 11-6, but fundamentally they're 8-5.
Mm-hmm.
I think most NFL teams set expectations at the 11-6 mark and not at the 8-5 mark. And you can make some poor decisions that way.
Agreed. Totally agree with everything that was said there. Couple others, Joe Woods, finally. I got to tell you, I'm going to be so high on Cleveland going into next year that it's going to be a real problem for me. Because Deshaun Watson with a full offseason, finally, maybe a defensive coordinator that's able to like take advantage of the personnel that they have on defense. I can't even believe Joe Woods lasted this long in this league.
Yeah, it's weird because like Cleveland is renowned for being like a sharp franchise, and I think that it just goes to show like why you need continuity at both head coach and coordinators and front office. And like one of the things that we're really trying to do at Sumer Sports is be a conduit there, because the Browns they didn't care about run defense in their personnel. Their linebackers are incredibly small and soft, and they played run defense as if they had the goods to do that, and so I think that is just a classic miss. There's a part of like doing the right thing from a player acquisition standpoint, and then maybe the wrong thing on a coaching standpoint. You have the same thing on the offensive side of the ball. Now, I think Stefanski's a better coach than Joe Woods, but like the biggest question you have to ask yourself if you're going to buy into Cleveland next year is Cleveland going to commit to the kind of offense where Deshaun Watson has success? The spread it out shotgun, and in fact, like, I think him and Cooper will be pretty good. I think Njoku was fantastic this year.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, Chubb and Hunt are good running backs if Hunt returns, but they have to tailor the offense to Deshaun Watson. Deshaun Watson can't be an under center, turn your back to the defense type quarterback. He just has not been that kind of player. If they can do that, I agree with you. I think that they're a good candidate to be worst to first. The only issue is that the Cincinnati Bengals, in my opinion, are still roster-wise very resilient and going to be very hard to beat.
I would agree on that latter point as well. Okay, let's get into it here. Super Wildcard Weekend. Let's go reverse order for now, just because selfishly I want to start with this game. And the notion, people who watch the stream, you'll see this Cowboys symbol behind me. I am a Dallas Cowboys fan. The thought of losing a playoff game to Tom Brady makes me want to vomit like all over my workstation here. And it seems that like I've come to reality with this is going to happen. Like I feel strongly that Dallas is going to lose this game. There's obviously a lot that plays into it. We don't know the status of the entirety of the Bucs offensive line yet in this game specifically. However, I think there's a scenario, and I'm talking through this in my head, where maybe the Bucs just figure out that they should come out and throw on this Cowboys secondary that's missing everybody. Like, and if they do that, I do not see a great path to success for Dallas.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And you joked about this a couple weeks ago when they were playing Carolina. It's like, they really are a rough team when it comes to like neutral game situations. Brady is fantastic, when the game is on the line and they have to throw the football. And the positive part here is that Dallas is an offense that when things go right, they can force Tampa Bay into a situation where they find out they're in a game and then they play offense. Mm-hmm. And if they do that, you're right. Like they're, obviously, Parsons is a great edge player. But I think Brady does a pretty good job of protecting his offensive line when he's dialed in. DeMarcus Lawrence is good, but again, like their interior there has been better than expected, but not amazing. And then, on the back half, they're just so injured, and the Bucs kind of have, I know Gage got hurt last week, but they have, enough receivers to really stretch you thin in the secondary, and they have enough differing receivers. So Godwin had over 100 catches, barely 1,000 yards. He's kind of the underneath guy. Evans now has sort of evolved into kind of the over the top player, and Dallas, their secondary isn't particularly fast, so it's not going to be something where they can neutralize Evans because of Evans's age and things like that. So I do agree. I think Tampa's going to score if they want to. To me, the whole question comes down to what kind of Dak Prescott do you get, and that to me is every single Dallas game, because if Dak Prescott plays well, like I just see them as being hard to beat. If Dak Prescott plays as he has played for much of the second half of the season, he's hard to win with.
I can tell you this from watching every Cowboys game this year, and this is reflected in the metrics as well. If Dak is going to be a pure drop back passer, it is not going to work for them. They need to get him on the move. They need to run a lot of play action. When he just drops back and passes, it's been horrible this year. I mean, he threw a pick six last week, literally a play after almost throwing a pick six. It's been a pretty rough go of it for him. And on top of that, now you get a Tampa Bay secondary that is probably going to have all of Jamel Dean, Carlton Davis, and Sean Murphy Bunting on the field together for the first time in a long time as well. It kind of get the vibes, as much as I hate to do this, because again, the Bucs coaching staff, in my opinion, is bad. And there's a possibility that they just come out here and they do the same stuff they've been doing all season. They plow Leonard Fournette for a half yard on every first down, and Brady has to overcome this. That's in like the range of possibilities. It's a very realistic possibility. But it does feel like, okay, this is a decent matchup for them. They get by this game, and then maybe they get Jensen back on the offensive line. And, you start to, you see the Bucs, like we envisioned them from the beginning of the year when they beat Dallas in week 1 and moved the ball up and down the field, and they just couldn't really punch it in the red zone. And the defense held up in that game. And it kind of, as bad as they've been this year, it feels like they could have a postseason run in them.
I agree. Yes. The thing is it's very interesting because they have, they're good where it matters in the NFL, and they're deep where it matters in the NFL. And, I was thinking it through, and they are poorly coached. I do remember a Dallas playoff game in 2018 where it was in Dallas, and the Seahawks came in, and you were like, okay, well they have to know that they gotta let Russ cook in this game or else. And they did like the Chris Carson and Rashad Penny up, and and so you could very well see that, and Dallas could squeak out with a win, and all is well. But Tampa Bay figuring out their offense a little bit in the second half of the season. They were okay in the first half the other day against Atlanta before they pulled people. And a couple with Dallas getting injured on defense, a defense where they need stars to play well. And to your point, Dak like just looks also physically limited this year more than normal. And it's just the Bucs defense is, has never wavered really this year of being good. I mean, they gave up a lot of points to Cincinnati at the end, but that was a lot of turnovers on Tampa Bay's part. Like, I do think that this is a matchup where if you can get a 3 with Tampa Bay, I think it's a good bet. And given kind of the low scoring environment of the NFL this year, it is a teasable play, I think, at 2.5.
Okay, so that's where I was going to get to with this, because the market, there are some like random 3s that exist in North America at like a few off books right now, but most of the market has gone to 2.5. So at this point, it's basically, do you play the money line at plus 120 or better? Do you play the 2.5? Because there's still a possibility that Dallas wins by 1 or 2 in a close game. The Bucs have played tons of close games this year, so that's within the range of possibilities. Or do you just take some sort of teaser and bring the Bucs up through 8.5? And with the total being in the mid 40s, I think the latter is probably the best play if you can find another game to pair them with in a teaser this week.
Yeah, and you're gonna get some options like that but they're not perfectly Wong teaser, but for example, you might end up being able to get the Jaguars up to 7.5 at some point. This week. You might also I mean, in fact, I think there are some books where they are at 1.5. And, given, if you get some good injury reports out of Los Angeles with Mike Williams and Nick and whichever Bosa, Joey Bosa, you might get that out to 2.5. And so, that game might be one where you pair it.
This one's an option
Ravens,
as well.
Bengals.
Yeah, Cincy -1. This one's an option right well that Randy recommends. Cincy -1, Tampa Bay 8.5.
Right, and that one's another one where if you don't quite like Cincinnati at -7 expensively, and that game might get to 8.5 by the time we kick, right? And then that one's an actual long teaser down to 2.5. That you can make a case though that if you think that that's the case, just lay the 7 with the Bengals right now. But those are two options that you have available to you. And there's another one also if the Giants get money, and they have been over the last day or so, that you might be able to get them at 2.5 up to 8.5 in Minnesota against the Vikings. But again, if you think that will happen, just take the Giants +3, I think.
Are you surprised? So you mentioned that the Bengals might get out to 8.5. Are you surprised that we haven't seen more of a move on the Bengals yet? Because, I mean, it's not been declared that Lamar Jackson is out, but it's pretty much widely known that it's extremely, extremely unlikely that he's going to play. Like, we're talking probably about 99% chance he doesn't play in this game, if not higher than that. And, I was talking with Chernoff about this. Obviously, the status of Tyler Huntley is important. Got a week off last week to rest. But even so, the Tyler Huntley Ravens offense, I watched that offense for a month, and that offense doesn't score points. So I'm actually very surprised we haven't moved off 7. We're starting to see some books like expensive 7s, like you said, 7 -120. A few books out to 7.5, but I'm surprised this move didn't happen a little bit earlier.
Well, I think there's a few things. I think that this number might reflect the injuries. I think Lamar Jackson is being viewed as, if he plays, he's going to be less than 100%, and he is not as big of a jump relative to Tyler Huntley as we would believe him to be by his name only, right? So you have a quarterback whose movement skills are his most important thing. You have a wide receiving core. Like, he hasn't even played with Sammy Watkins yet, who's like coming since he came over.
Mm-hmm.
So even if Lamar comes in, you're like, the passing game will surely be better, but it's capped off by how terrible that supporting cast is. So I don't know. I don't think the market's pricing the delta between him and Huntley as big as we believe it to be. And that might be ridiculous. He might be healthy, and he might just be holding out for the playoffs because he's pissed off about his contract. But I think that that's the reason it's there. And then I also think, there's injuries with Cincinnati. There's also this, and maybe I could be reading too much into this, but I think some people believe that Cincinnati is like peaked too early, and they're kind of on their downturn for the season. They surely did not play great against the Ravens last week. And I do think that there are some aspects of the Ravens, the way they match up with them defensively, where they can get in your face and kind of push you around a little bit, that, I do think this closes bigger, but I think those are the reasons why right now it's only a 7.5.
I still think the Ravens are very dangerous in this game, regardless. Like, I'm by no means suggesting that, like Cincinnati is a lock to win or anything like that. But typically, I would say on like a Lamar probably not playing type of news, and you're either going to get, you're going to get another Brown start, or a Huntley who's had injury designations in the past few weeks. I'm just surprised we haven't seen that number. But the right side of the O-line for the Bengals is a problem right now.
Yeah.
Alex Kappa's hurt. Lyle Collins is on IR. That's like, we're getting back into the territory of Bengals earlier in the year where O-line was an issue, and like everyone's like, well, the Bengals are like, they're a frauds. People thought the Bengals were going to be the Super Bowl hangover team, right? Like, they finally made the run, and there is some credence to that.
Yeah, Justin Houston, he's only had a half a sack in the last like 6 or 7 weeks, but he has 9.5 sacks. He's a backup for that team, and he rushes from the outside on the left side. When you look at other players that play for you have, I'm looking here, Pierre Paul is a player on that team. Tyus Bowser, Adafe Owe, they come at you with a diverse group of edge players. No stars there because they never pick in the top 10, but they're all players that can hurt you. And Burrow has those games, right, where he just takes sacks, and you take a sack or two here and there, and that's 2 points to the point spread. So I think that's, what would you, so I guess the question would be if Lamar was perfectly healthy, what would you make this game? I mean, is it Cincinnati
4?
Okay.
So I think 4 or 4.5.
I think maybe the market would. I think maybe there's a thought that people. I mean, maybe opening. Folks that open the number would have made it 3 instead. I don't know.
Tough one. I feel like they're. When Huntley first replaced Lamar, I really didn't think that the market made a big enough adjustment for that. I think Huntley had a very good against the spread record last year, and he won a lot of bets for people, and they just translated that into like, oh, Huntley's perfectly serviceable, he's fine. Like, no, yes, but like it's still a huge downgrade. Like, especially when you consider the lack of weapons, right? Like Rashad Bateman on IR, Devin Duvernay, like they don't have the weapons that you can just take Lamar out of there and be like, all right, you're in, and like, okay, it's, lob it up to like AJ Brown or Devontae Smith in Philadelphia or other teams that have like these 2 wide receiver, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf. It's not that in Baltimore, right? It's like, okay, like look for Mark Andrews if he's covered. What am I going to do? I'm going to, Tyler Huntley has how many rushes for 1 yard? He's got to be like the leader in the league in that category.
Yeah, for sure. That's it. And you're right. Like, he had high profile covers against decent teams, right? And so that were on like, not necessarily like prime time, but they were on like 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock games. And I do think that and he's better than expected, right? He's an undrafted guy out of Utah that he's certainly outplayed his draft status, but that does not necessarily mean that he's good enough. Like, he's a good enough quarterback to bet on here.
Agreed. I'll get you out here in 1 minute, Eric. Just wanted to get quick thoughts on, for me, the game I'm looking forward to the most, which is Chargers and Jags. The reason I'm very interested in this is because I've talked to probably a dozen people, and I think it's pretty split 50-50 in terms of who they like in this game. The market has moved out a little bit towards the Chargers, but I find the Chargers to be an incredibly difficult team to value or put a number on, because essentially we haven't seen the Chargers as they are now for the entire season. So from a season-long metrics point of view, people might say, oh, the Jags are better than the Chargers in every category, pretty much across the board. Well, yeah, I mean, Justin Herbert had rib injuries, Mike Williams missed time, Keenan Allen missed time, injuries on the defensive line, injuries on the offensive line. So curious your thoughts on the Chargers heading into the playoffs, this specific game, and whether or not they have a potential run in them.
Yeah, to me, they're the most, I sort of think of Herbert's Chargers. They're always going to be kind of like Eli Manning's Giants, where, they just
don't know. You can't compare Herbert to Eli. Please, not for me, Eric. We can't do that comparison.
He's not Eli is not as talented as Herbert, right?
Like, okay, we can move on now, as long as we're gonna don't let me go into my Eli Manning shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame rant. I don't want to do this one again.
But the Giants had the character. The Giants had a lot of like regular seasons where you're like, what the hell is wrong with you? Mm-hmm. You have good players. Coaching's getting in your way. The quarterback is less than what you think he is. Like, Herbert averaged 6.7 yards per pass attempt this year, and I think like all of us believe he's good, but the production wasn't there. And like, it's Joe Lombardi. It's and yet there's always a little bit of a part of me, and maybe this is my Chiefs fandom here, where that's like scared shitless of like him, putting together 4 straight games where he and the same way that you as a Cowboys fan, like with Eli, it's like the guy just blacks out for a month and I think when you look at all the teams in this league, I think they're the wild card team with the best chance to win the Super Bowl. Maybe not because of the NFC, but of the AFC wild cards are easily one. And I think they're the best wild card team. So with all that said, like that's my worry. But there are parts of the Chargers where if you could coach your bet, you would win them all. And that's just like getting Joe Lombardi out of that chair and being like, run some patterns past the sticks on third down, right? And so while you say like all this stuff, like most of the Chargers are going to be healthy, most of the pieces are going to be in place for them, but you still can't control what Joe Lombardi does. And for that reason, I can't bet the Chargers this week, even though I am bullish on them, like just broadly. If they do put it all together, I think every AFC contender, the Bengals, the Chiefs, and the Bills should all be scared of them.
I agree with you on that. I can totally see it. Like the Chargers could win the Super Bowl, and yeah. I would not be surprised at all. That's Eric Eager. Follow Sumer Sports on Twitter at Sumer Sports, Sumer Sports. If you want to see more of Eric's content, he does some amazing stuff on there every single week. I encourage everyone to check it out. Eric, hopefully you get home to your family, safe travels, and we'll talk next week.
Hey, thanks for having me. Take care, man.
All right, Eric. Okay. From Eric, who is in lovely Florida, to Suma in lovely Germany. What are we looking at for temperatures in Germany right now?
It's about 4 to 5 degrees Celsius. So I think I would probably change venues with Eric on the spot.
Sure, but I change venues with you on the spot right now too. So I mean, we're below zero over here. It sucks.
Oh no.
Yeah, it is what it is. For those who don't know, Fabian Sommer is a professional NFL bettor located in Germany. Probably the only NFL bettor located in Germany. No, that's not true. The NFL is like making a push into Germany now, so I'm sure that there's some more bettors that are in there. What is the popularity of the NFL in Germany? Let's start there.
The popularity of the NFL is crazy. I think during the season, I would likely call it close to the second or third most favorite sports of the Germans when we go after like TV viewership in general. Betting, I don't know, because sports betting in Germany is very difficult. We are the only country in the world with a gambling tax, so betting over here is pretty difficult. But yeah, NFL, the popularity is going crazy here, and we will have at least three more years with NFL games in Germany.
I mean, they're making a push. The NFL's making its push into Europe, really trying to grow the sport over there. Suma, let's get into the games this week. We haven't, I talked to Chernoff already. I talked to Eric Eager. We haven't really talked much of Seahawks and 49ers for the most part. That number has now come off 10 to 9.5, pretty much across the board at most books. But what's an especially intriguing storyline in this game, in my opinion, is the potential for brutal weather. And the chances that we might see some ongoing heavy downpour at Levi Stadium on Saturday. I'm curious if that changes your handicap of the game at all. And also just curious your general thoughts on the Seahawks and 49ers, because I know you've been high on the 49ers for a long time now relative to market, and that's worked out quite well for you. But in this game, do you think that the market has potentially over-adjusted here at all?
I don't think that the market has over-adjusted when we ignore the weather for a minute. This game closed around Niners -3, -120-ish a few weeks back. It was the first ever NFL road game for Brock Purdy, who was coming off a game where he injured his ribs, and his status at some point was in doubt, and he only had like 3 limited practices in a walkthrough. I think Deebo Samuel was out that game already, when I remember correctly. So it was a very tough spot for a 7th-round rookie quarterback in his first ever NFL road game at Lumen Field to be in. But I think since then, the Niners have been an absolute machine, and the Seahawks have also declined over the second half of the season. They are 3-5 in their last 8 games, and 2 of those wins were against the Rams with Baker Mayfield and John Wolford, and they needed basically a nail-biter in the end to pull out those games. I think that the Niners in general are also a very tough matchup for the Seahawks, because, to be fair, the Niners are a tough matchup for most teams in the NFL, but especially for the Seahawks, with a very inexperienced offensive line that got hammered in the trenches in both of these matchups already this year. And the Niners can easily move the ball on this Seahawks defense. So I think somewhere around a 10 is a very good line for this game. And now it becomes interesting with the weather. I mean, it's the Bay Area. The weather forecast is changing like every 8 hours. So we might see another 2 or 3 weather changes. But at some point yesterday, it looked like we would get some heavy rains and also winds with high gusts. And I think if that somehow holds until Saturday evening or evening my time, I think it makes sense that we saw a little bit of Seahawks money because that weather, despite the Niners having a decent matchups also when running the football, always increases variance. And I think if something increases variance, you want to be on the side of the +10 dog, I would guess, rather than the -10 favorite. But yeah, if the weather report is not as drastic and we don't have as much of wind or as much rain, I think that the Niners have a great matchup for the Seahawks. Yes, it's the classic first ever playoff start for a quarterback game, which has been not the greatest trend in the past, but I think that most of these quarterbacks have also not played with this supporting cast on the 49ers team.
I think this is definitely going to be what I call the narrative game, where you have, you have the first time playoff quarterback in Brock Purdy being a big favorite. People forget that Geno Smith hasn't played a playoff game either, but that's besides the point. Then there's it's tough to beat a team 3 times in the season crowd. We hear that a lot, which it's actually that's completely been disproven and falsified many times before. There's nothing to that stat either. So I'll call that the narrative game. For me, there was a game like a month ago. It was Cleveland hosting New Orleans. It was the extreme wind game, right? 40 miles an hour. And I was just basically I'm going to take New Orleans in this game because what is differentiating these teams in conditions where neither team can really throw the ball? Is Cleveland's running game worth that much more? And depending on how the weather shapes up in this game, I almost feel the same way. It's okay, if this was played in great conditions, I'm going to give San Fran pretty much every advantage across the board. But now you turned it into a bit of a slop fest, and it's maybe that just really changes the game where one team cannot separate and at a large margin. And look at the total of the game, right? 42.5. It's pretty appealing getting a 9.5 point dog when the total in the game is that low as well. So that's kind of my thoughts on this one. I think the weather is slightly changing my opinion on this game if it holds up.
Yeah, the issue with these weather games is that when you take away most of your passing game, which has worked very well for the Niners despite playing with Brock Purdy, it was basically just interchanging quarterbacks from Jimmy Garoppolo to Brock Purdy, who also seems to be a little bit more ballsy and stable on high pressure situations. When you take away that component, the Niners still have to be almost perfect on the ground to somehow lead by margin at some point of the game. And if it's heavy rain, we have some variance with slippery fumbles and stuff like that. So yeah, I totally agree. If it's bad weather, it's likely leading towards the Seahawks here as a big underdog.
Listen, this is a fair comment or a fair question. Isn't San Fran's effective line of scrimmage passing game an edge in this weather? I guess you could look at it in that way. You could look at the fact that San Fran has a very reliable target over the middle of the field and George Kittle in the short passing game as well. I personally just don't view it that way. Anytime I think you see conditions that are out of the ordinary, I think it tends to bring the teams closer together. Yeah. So that's just my general thoughts on that game. Okay, let's switch gears here. Want to get to some games that we didn't cover all that much. The Giants and the Vikings is another one. I talked about this with Chernoff, and actually I'm very curious, Suma, in your opinion of using the transitive property to handicap games, because there's lots of feelings on this, and this has become a topic in gambling Twitter this week, right? It's the Vikings closed 4.5 point favorites against the Giants a few weeks back. How could they only be -3 in this game? And people anchor themselves to previous results. I'm curious on your thoughts when people use that in their handicapping. Do you use that in yours at all? And let's break down this Giants-Vikings game overall.
Yeah, so when it comes to the closing line, I think it was the Christmas Eve game. Correct me if I'm wrong. Yeah, so the Vikings closed -4.5 in that game. I've been very down on the Vikings in general. I also had the Giants in that game, and I was much closer towards 3. But independent of that, I think in this game, the Giants outplayed the Vikings, and the Vikings needed like a fumble at the 23-yard line, deep in Vikings territory from Daniel Bellinger. I think there was an interception from Daniel Jones deep in Vikings territory, and then they needed like the last second 61-yard field goal to beat the Giants by 3 points. And first of all, this is already a data point because at the time when the market closes, this is our perceived best probability distribution on the upcoming game. But that game already is another data point, and we saw that the Giants outplayed the Vikings. Then we have another game where the Vikings got completely crushed by the Packers, who didn't even make the playoffs, and the Giants took care of business against the Colts. So we have 2 more data points of Giants being like a very decent, capable team, and the Vikings of basically playing up to their fraud level, I would say. And also, the Vikings since then lost 2 offensive linemen. Their backup center, Schlottman. I don't know whether Garrett Bradbury will be back this week, but they will be without their starting right tackle, Brian O'Neill, who's arguably a borderline top 10 tackle in this league. And the Giants will likely get Adoree Jackson back, which also could play a big role in this game because the Giants play a lot of man coverage, and Adoree Jackson might be lined up on Justin Jefferson a lot. So just based on that, I think there is a very good case to be made that the Vikings should be downgraded off of that, and that the Giants should be upgraded off of that. So I think it's totally reasonable as to why the Giants are only 3-point underdogs. I bet the Giants already at +3. I made this line closer to 2.25. I really like the Giants here because what's really separating these 2 teams right now, other than the potential upside in the passing game between Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson? Like, the Giants defense is not worse than the Vikings defense. The Giants offense has actually been better than the Vikings this season. So the only thing that I could make a difference for is like maybe Daniel Jones's first ever playoff start and the home field advantage of the Minnesota Vikings. But other than that, just performance-wise, there's like only the home field advantage, in my opinion, and the potential upside when Kirk Cousins and Justin Jefferson are really clicking. But that's not a consistent theme within this season. So, in general, I think that the Giants have a very, very good matchup here against a team that has significantly overperformed this season. I think that the Giants should be able to run the ball, to move the ball on play action against that zone-heavy Vikings defense. The Giants' offensive line is kind of decent, so I really struggle to make too much of a difference between these 2 teams.
Just to add to that as well, the Giants basically coming off of a mini bye. I mean, they didn't technically have a bye week, but they rested starters against the Philadelphia Eagles last week. And then on top of that, something I always point out, and there's, I think, certain quarterbacks in the league, I often like to look at how they fare in specific situations. Kirk Cousins has very extreme splits versus, when he has a clean pocket versus when he is pressured. The Giants generate pressure at the number 5 level in the league. They have a defensive coordinator who is known for bringing pressure. Now, in my opinion, there's going to be some times where Kirk is just going to throw it up to Justin Jefferson in this game one-on-one when he's getting blitzed, and he's going to make plays. I don't think they're going to completely shut him down, whether Adoree Jackson is in there or not. But I also think there's going to be a few times in this game where the Giants turn up the heat and they're able to get home. And we've seen Kirk make some mistakes in that type of situation. I'm very similar with my handicap of this game to you and my number as well. We'll go a little bit rapid fire through the remainder of these games here, but Monday Night Football is a big one, Cowboys and Bucks. Market has completely moved off of 3 at this point to 2.5. Is that surprising to you at all?
Not at all. I would like to get a flat +3 with the Bucks here. I think it's a great spot. For as bad as the Buccaneers have looked all season, I still think that this is a very good matchup for them because they will likely have their almost starting offensive line back this week. The Cowboys defense, I don't think they are in the top tier. I think that they have done very well against bad offenses, but we saw in games against the Eagles and Jaguars that you can easily throw the ball on them all over the field. And the Bucks have a decent to good tackle tandem, and the biggest strength of the Cowboys is their edge rush with DeMarcus Lawrence and Micah Parsons. So this is kind of strength on strength. I think that the Bucks should be able to run the ball on the Cowboys. And then you still have a receiving group with Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, and Julio Jones against a secondary that is missing 2 starting cornerbacks already. And they also lost another cornerback in Bland last week. So it might be Kevin Joseph season again. And I think that Tom Brady will look for that matchup all day long. So I don't think that the Cowboys defense has a great matchup against them. So I would expect the Bucks to move the ball. And then on the other side, the Cowboys, when we really break it down, yes, they have been super efficient at times, but they have also been inconsistent, kind of mistake prone. And outside of CeeDee Lamb, there was not really any wide receiver who really stepped up and was able to took a lot of pressure off of that connection from Prescott to CeeDee Lamb. So Buccaneers at home, great spot for them, great matchup. I think that there are a lot of people who would like to get them at +3. That's why the market is currently sitting around a, let's say, soft 2.5, circa a flat 2.5, Chris shade towards the Cowboys. But yeah, Bucks at 3 would be the play here, in my opinion.
Okay, we'll let you out on this. There's 3 other games: Buffalo, Miami, Chargers, Jags, Ravens, Bengals. Anything else in either of those games that you want to go over, potential lean that you have on any of the games that we haven't touched on yet?
Yeah, I think Bills, Dolphins, Bengals, Ravens. Market has kind of moved already off the quarterback news. We will likely not see Lamar Jackson. Tua Tagovailoa has already been ruled out, so there's not a ton of value left there. But even though the market has already moved on them quite a bit, I still kind of like the Chargers at the current market price. It's almost a range where I would not play it anymore. But I think, gun to my head, it's still Chargers or nothing for me here. I really like the Jaguars in general, but I think that the Chargers are overall a better team. They are almost completely healthy. I don't think that they will get Rashawn Slater back this year. Might be aiming for next week if they advance to playing the Chiefs at Arrowhead potentially. But the Jaguars passing game has been very funneled in the short area of the field, over the middle of the field. They're not throwing the ball deep, not too much to the outside. And that is basically strength on strength with the Chargers defense, who can go toe-to-toe with Zay Jones, with Marvin Jones. They can put Dervin James on Evan Ingram in the slot. They've also been a little bit better against the run in recent weeks. And I think that Brent Staley has really, really come up with some great game plans in recent weeks. Joey Bosa back, Khalil Mack, Joey Bosa, Calvin Noy, top 5 pass rushing group right now. Cam Robinson is missing for the Jaguars. They're starting left tackle. So I think that the Chargers might win this game in the trenches. Their offense should be able to score points on a very young and still inexperienced Jaguars defense. Then on the other side, I don't really trust the Jaguars and Trevor Lawrence to really capitalize and throw on the Chargers all day long.
I pretty much agree with everything you had to say there. I often wonder if, we undervalue like the return of these star edge rushers. We saw it with the Steelers, right? Like TJ Watt coming back. The market makes an adjustment for that, but it's a completely different team.
Yep.
And I feel like the Chargers defense is just completely different when you have Joey Bosa on the other side of Khalil Mack there. It's a pretty potent pass rushing duo. So I echo a lot of what you said there. The biggest concern for me, Chargers coaching staff is ultimately what it comes down to for me. But anyways, thanks for joining us, Suma. If you're looking for more stuff from Suma, you can always catch him doing football coverage here on Forward Progress for the Hammer and on the Hammer HQ. Enjoy the games this weekend, Suma.
Peace out.
All right. Pretty jam-packed show. We will put this up in podcast form as well for people who want to listen it back. It'll be available on YouTube for replay as well. Programming updates for Forward Progress. We do have Band of Betters getting posted, some short form content if you're looking for some system plays this week in the NFL. Friday, we are back as well here on Forward Progress. That's going to be a lot more props driven, looking at some anytime touchdown scores. Props are going to be posted at Betfred for all of the games this weekend as well. So we'll get to as many of those as we can on Friday. And there's going to be stuff that changes between now and then. We're going to have a lot of injury reports to deal with. So we will bring it back on Friday here on Forward Progress. Once again, consider subscribing to the channel if you do enjoy the content. And definitely if you watch today and haven't hit the like button so far, hit that like button. Goes a long way for us in being able to get our content found here on YouTube. Appreciate everyone who joined in. Check out Betfred Sportsbook, especially if you're in Ohio, where they just launched due to regulated gambling on January 1st. We're very proud to have Betfred as a partner here on the Hammer Betting Network. All right, everyone. Thank you for watching. For myself, Rob Pizzola, for our producer, Zach Phillips. Thank you to guests Adam Chernoff, Eric Eager, Fabian Sommer. We'll see you again on Forward Progress. Peace out.